Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Chatting Cinema. I'm Flynn.
I'm Gianni.
I'm Luke.
I'm Chase.
Yes, we're joined by Chase. This is his first time on the pod.
We got a rookie.
Long-time
Yeah.
listener, first-time caller.
Yeah.
And today we're going to be talking about Spider-Man. I don't know if you could tell.
Yeah, we kind of like Spider-Man here.
Yeah.
Like a lot.
We adore.
So what we wanted to do for this episode was we were going to each offer our rankings of the Spider-Man films, all live action plus Spider-Verse. And so we're going to do the rankings first, and then we're going to have a bit of discussion on what we think is the best, what we think is the worst, what we think is the middle.
Let me whip out my phone to go on my Letterboxd account.
Yeah, I can get started. So I'll go top to bottom. So my number one is Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. And then we'll get into the hot takes. My number two is Spider-Man Far From Home.
Hot take alert.
Hot take number one.
Oops.
3 is Homecoming. Then Spider-Man 2, Spider-Man 1, Amazing Spider-Man, Amazing Spider-Man 2, and Spider-Man 3. That is my list.
That is something else.
I will go next, I suppose. My number one is also Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. My number two is also Spider-Man 2. No, your number two is Far From Home.
It was.
All right, so my number two is Spider-Man 2, Sam Raimi. 3 is Spider-Man Homecoming. Then I have The Amazing Spider-Man, Far From Home,
Ooh.
Spider-Man, Spider-Man 3, and The Amazing Spider-Man 2.
Alrighty, I will go next.
Heaters.
I am totally a trendsetter. Just kidding. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is 1. Then number 2 is Homecoming.
Nice.
Number 3 is Spider-Man. Number 4 is The Amazing Spider-Man.
Oh.
Number 5 is Spider-Man 2.
Oh.
Number 6 is Far From Home. Number 7 is Amazing Spider-Man 2. And number 8 is Spider-Man 3.
Wow.
All right, what you got, rookie?
Okay, take your drinks at home. Get ready for a hot take, spit take. Spider-Verse is my number one.
Yes.
Then
A
it's-
clean sweep.
Then Raimi's Spider-Man 2 is my second. Then Far From Home. Then Raimi's Spider-Man 1. Then Homecoming. Then a pretty big gap. Then Raimi 3. And then Amazing Spider-Man 2. Then Amazing Spider-Man 1.
Before we get into what we hate, can we just gush about Into the Spider-Verse real quick?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So good.
To start, I don't hate any of these movies. I'd watch any of them, but I think that we have pretty similar thoughts with your big gap there. Into the Spider-Verse.
What a movie.
Yeah.
So good.
I was excited for it, but not incredibly so. I was like, yeah, it'll probably be good.
Yeah.
But then, so I didn't actually rush out to see it, despite how much I love Spider-Man. And all I heard again and again and again was, this is a masterpiece. You have to see it. And I'm like, all right, one masterpiece. Okay. But then, keep seeing people call it a masterpiece. I was like, yeah, we'll see. And then I watched it, and the first thing I said after I saw it was, do you guys want to see the 10:30 showing?
Yep.
And go right back, because I could have watched it again right there, because it's fantastic.
So when that movie was announced, I was like, okay. I mean, Sony, you trying. We see you.
Yep.
I wasn't particularly thrilled about it, though, because, like, I wanted to see Spider-Man live action. And I was like, I mean, I'm going to watch it. So I ended up missing it in theaters, even though you told me to see it a million times. Then when I finally saw it at home for the first time, I was so shooketh. I was like, this breaks the best superhero movies list of all time for me.
Yep.
I'm like, I am so mad at myself for not seeing it in theaters.
Yeah. I was probably in Flynn's boat where I wasn't super pumped for it and like the hype wasn't there. And then after I saw it, I was like, that was amazing.
Yeah.
That was the best Spider-Man movie that I've ever seen.
I was actually really hyped for this movie before it came out. I'm a big fan of like Phil Lord and Chris Miller. And, like, Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs is great. If you guys have ever seen that, it's a
Fantastic
really great
movie.
movie. And so I had faith that this movie would be good. And I saw the first trailer and I was like blown away
Yeah.
by the animation alone. Because I think it's a perfect film. Like,
Yeah,
it is
I
one
agree
of my
with that.
favorites, if not my favorite.
I agree with that. I
So
think
this is where the
perfect.
agreeing ends.
Yeah.
It's tearing each other apart.
So I think that Far From Home at 2 for me is a scorcher of a take, because I feel like there are a lot of people that really hate that movie.
I don't hate it at all.
I know, but there's like a
But
certain
film Twitter.
Yeah, I wouldn't even say film Twitter as far as Spider-Man Twitter. And
R
there,
slash Raimi memes.
yes, yeah.
Yeah.
There is a very dedicated fan base of the Sam Raimi films. that I think grew up with them. I did too, but have a real connection to them and see that as their definitive Spider-Man, aside from comics. But I feel that way about Tom Holland, and comic changes, complain about Iron Man all you want, but to me, Tom Holland really gets the essence of what I love about Spider-Man, and putting him in a movie with Jake Gyllenhaal's Mysterio, which I thought was so phenomenal and so well done, and again, gets dinged. Oh, he's an Iron Man villain. He's mad at Tony Stark. And it's like, yeah, but I really liked the update to his origin. Not the Iron Man I can take or leave. I like the connection to the larger cinematic universe, but if you're not thrilled about it, I understand that. But the utilization of like a CG suit as the way to create the illusions was so cool to me. Working in the Edith technology, so awesome. Drones creating the illusions. I thought that made a lot of sense and made Mysterio a really realistic villain. And I liked him a lot.
I think that a lot of people complained about the he's an Iron Man villain thing. And I was like, but listen, like Spider-Man, like Tom Holland Spider-Man's whole story arc has been taking on that mantle while also still remaining himself. And Far From Home literally did that, like in such a great way. So people complaining about that, read into the story more.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I definitely can see criticism for the Iron Man connection.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't personally mind it.
Yeah.
I do mind how like he doesn't necessarily have money issues in these new ones. Not every version has to be the same, but that's part of the character I really like. It doesn't take away from the film at all, though it's maybe a problem down the line for those movies. I think they'll have to address. But Far From Home is fantastic. I love the vacation film feel. Yeah. It's a romantic comedy for like the first hour, which I think is really great. It's my favorite. I think they nailed the Spider-Man romance, which is more important than you would think it is.
Yeah, I do too. I agree.
Yeah, I agree. I think so many points in Far From Home feel like an indie movie to me, like an indie romance movie, and I love seeing the group kind of on their trip and on vacation. And I think we had like a perfect amount of moments with that too. Like I wasn't really left desiring more. And those are my favorite moments in that film. And I love Mysterio too. I think he's a great villain. But for me, the reason it falls so far down on that list is because it's like I look at movies like The Amazing Spider-Man, which is above it, and I feel like those are more mature and more grounded for Peter. And I just feel like, I don't know, at least in Far From Home, his problems are pretty easily solved, I would say. That's just me. And I know that's kind of the mentality on film Twitter too, especially with this Spider-Man crowd. They think like that this Peter has everything kind of handed to him and everything's too easy. I wouldn't go that far, but I do think in Far From Home, there are a lot of big consequences that he doesn't necessarily suffer for. Like I think about the drone shot on the bus when he like orders a drone strike on Brad.
Yeah, that does happen.
And it's like that's my least favorite scene in the movie. I wish it was cut. I don't know.
You've never ordered a drone strike before?
No.
Oh, can't relate.
I will say, I think that's something that MCU Spider-Man, especially the solo films, not so much when we see him in the Avengers movies, but I think Far From Home handles really well the struggle to balance his life as Peter and his life as Spider-Man. And that's something that I really like about Spider-Man. And as far as like scenes like the drone strike go, it's like slapsticky and like kind of over the top. But to me, that sort of feels like a comparison to how you would feel in high school. Like everything is end of the world. Like, oh, I wish I could just blow this guy's phone out of his hand. So that to me is why that sort of like works. Just like the sort of comparison to how it feels versus how it actually is and how insignificant it is in the long run.
I think it nails high school
Yeah.
more. I think Spider-Verse also nails high school.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I think it nails high school better than any of the live action movies does. Homecoming and Far From Home.
Yeah.
So this is kind of for both of them.
Yeah.
Like it's not Amazing Spider-Man and Raimi where they're all like 20 years old.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very uncomfortable.
Yeah. It's you don't have
that Flash was not in high school. I'm sorry.
I think he was 27.
Yeah.
Like the teacher looks younger than the students.
Yeah.
But I think not only the ages, just the feeling of being in high school.
I think so too.
Yeah, I mean, Homecoming,
with
I feel like really drives that home too, with like the house party scenes, like the dance, like all those scenes, like you were talking about, like the Peter's life, like not just being Spider-Man. Like I think that's where Tom Holland's strength is that his character as Peter is the strongest.
Yeah, I agree with that. And the thing I love most about Homecoming and Far From Home is that I really think like John Watts and company really take into account those first Sam Raimi movies and the Amazing Spider-Man films too. And I think in a lot of ways, Homecoming and Far From Home feel like a mix of those movies that came before it. So I like that we're not totally writing off things that happened in the Raimi films and in the Amazing Spider-Man films too. Like it all kind of comes through in this younger Peter, different Peter, you know. That's how I feel. But, do you want to get into our worst on our list?
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Flynn and I agree.
Yeah.
So we both had Spider-Man 3 as our worst. So I think our reasons are kind of similar.
Okay.
Because I think we talked about this.
Yeah.
Where it's like a personal gripe of like when we were kids, we were so excited to see this movie.
Yeah.
And it was like a letdown, you know?
Yeah, for sure. I think that this is the first movie I can point to having like specific problems as a kid, and because and this is like weirdly nitpicky, but I'm such a big fan of the symbiote storyline. So when I saw what the symbiote suit looked like in the Raimi movies, I was like, man, that ain't it. I was genuinely upset by it, and it's such a little thing, but it just feels off to me. And you know, this happens in movies when you have Sam Raimi who's trying to do the best he can, who just cranked out 2 superhero movies that are phenomenal
at the time where they were not cool and not respected.
Yeah, just like blowing up the box office, making crazy good films that still stand the test of time, that still, when you ask filmmakers that are like delving into this comic book world, like what's your biggest inspiration from these, they still hold up Raimi's Spider-Man 2 especially as sort of like the peak of what superhero cinema can be. I think a lot of people think that way. So it's just frustrating because I don't think it's Sam Raimi's fault. I don't think it's Tobey Maguire's fault. It's pretty much all on Sony, because they were like, oh, well, we're going to do Venom and we're going to have this and that. It doesn't work for me. Venom doesn't work in that movie for me. New Goblin does not work in that movie for me. As funny as he is, as, you know, wink, wink, nudge, nudge to the camera over the top, doesn't work for me. And I'm a Gwen Stacy guy. I prefer Gwen Stacy, even though I agree with you that I think the MCU MJ romance is my favorite in the movies. I love Gwen Stacy. So to see Gwen Stacy relegated to like, it's not Gwen Stacy. Like, again, it's not Bryce Dallas Howard's fault. It's the way the character was presented to her. But that's not Gwen Stacy at all.
Yeah, and going off of what you said, like how they were forcing so many villains into that movie, the best one was given the least screen time.
Yeah.
Sandman was so well done.
Yeah.
Great casting. His scenes were great, and I was enjoying that character so much. And then it was like, Topher Grace is Venom. Like, I'm sorry, what? Like that, like out of the entire that 70s show cast, like every other main character would have been better as Venom.
Fez Venom.
Grace. Like all
you
of
cowards.
them. Donna Venom. All of them. Bob Venom.
Oh man.
Like literally every single one. And it's nothing.
Kitty
Topher Grace.
Venom.
Kitty Venom, just like hysterically laughing as she kills Spider-Man. But no, like for real, like the villains were so mismanaged in that movie, and you can have more than one villain in a movie and be fine. But that ain't it. The way they did it, that ain't it.
Well, my thing in defense of Topher Grace, and I've said this off camera, is that I think he is the perfect foil to Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker.
That's fair.
Get
but as Venom, that's
yeah.
what I meant.
Well, I mean, I think it gets back to what you said about Bryce Dallas Howard and being Gwen Stacy. That's just how the character is presented.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think it was Topher Grace's fault.
Well, it's like Tom Hardy as Bane in Dark Knight Rises. Like I don't blame Tom
Hardy.
yeah, that's true.
To play devil's advocate to Spider-Man 3, I think there's a lot in that movie that does work, and I can see where, even with the Venom, I think the worst part is the Venom storyline, but I can see what they're trying to do. Topher Grace is supposed to be a nerdy foil to Peter,
right?
And he is a foil.
Yeah.
And like the black suit storyline where he does the dancing, it's stupid.
Yeah.
But if you are a goofy nerd and you're trying to be cool,
yes,
maybe that's. I think that's what he's going for, and I don't think the movie's great. I think I think the good does shine through, especially now that some time has passed. Like,
Yeah.
Flynn Marco's great. A lot of the stuff with Peter, kind of pre-black suit, kind of like when it's not that storyline, is great, and the action's great. I think, like the crane scene where he's saving Gwen Stacy is a really cool scene. I think it carries over the action from Spider-Man 2 a lot.
Yeah.
Which is great.
Yeah, and again, sometimes it's hard to like separate that, like when you were dealing with like engaging with art in formative years. Like if you had something against that, then that sort of carries on and it becomes harder to look at it objectively. So I say that as people that like really enjoy that movie, like know that I am carrying that baggage into my commentary of that movie.
Yeah.
So true.
Yeah.
I still hate Ice Age to this day. I could do a whole pod on it.
Don't we all?
Facts.
For me, Spider-Man 3, the reason it doesn't fall last on my list is because I think of the trilogies that we have, and I know we only have 2 of MCU's Spidey films, but I think it's the most consistent in the context of its trilogy. Like I think Spider-Man 3 follows through on what's set up in 1 and 2 really well. And yes, there are your Venoms and there are your poorly represented characters. Like I agree with you about Gwen Stacy, which I'll get into in my least favorite movie, Spider-Man movie, is The Amazing Spider-Man 2. I also really love Gwen Stacy, and I love what's set up in The Amazing Spider-Man between Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone's characters. And to me, that was my favorite romance before Peter and MJ in the MCU came about. I liked those characters, and I think that was a good representation of Gwen Stacy. Same thing with Spider-Verse too. Really shows her character super well.
Gwen Stacy in Spider-Verse is so good.
Yeah, that's probably the best Gwen Stacy we've gotten.
Yeah.
But my thing with The Amazing Spider-Man 2, in contrast to Spider-Man 3, is that like it ends on Gwen Stacy's death, and I felt
Spoiler
that.
alert.
Oh yeah, in case you haven't seen
Movie came out in
You better put that
2014.
on the screen.
the cinematic masterpiece, The Amazing Spider-Man 2.
Saw it at midnight.
I think that so many dramatic and heavy moments in that film aren't earned, whereas in Spider-Man 3, I think they totally are.
Fair.
Like, I really felt the death of
Spoiler alert.
Harry Osborn.
I just heard you say death. I was like, oh, another one.
Yeah.
What's the matter, little goblin? Gonna cry?
So that's for me though, and I just think The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is just a mess. But I think you could say the same thing about Raimi's Spider-Man 3. And the thing they have in common is that it's all Sony. Like, Sony played such a role in crafting those movies and mixing things around, taking away from directors' visions. And, like, I think both films have really great ideas on paper, and they were just kind of interfered with, you know?
I think for me, Amazing Spider-Man 2, interesting enough, like what you were touching on about Spider-Man 3 parts working, I think that hurts the film for me because some of it works, some of it doesn't. Whereas Amazing Spider-Man 2, I just laugh the whole time. Like it's not like, and now it's easier to because we have Tom Holland and Spidey's in the MCU, but like back then when that was the Spider-Man that we were getting, like oh man, that movie is just. It is funny.
That's why it's not my word.
Yeah.
'Cause I think
I think it's consistently entertaining
Yeah,
throughout the
I
whole.
have to agree.
And I love Jamie Foxx. It wasn't good, but I love him so much.
Lighting the birthday candles. Yeah, Jamie Foxx is Jim Carrey's Edward Nygma in Amazing Spider-Man 2.
I like when the gap in his teeth get fixed by a
Paul
puncture.
Giamatti's Rhino.
I am the Rhino.
Yeah, Paul Giamatti's running. Yeah, you know that it almost feels like a kamikaze. Like somebody at Sony was like, "I'm gonna get Spider-Man into the MCU. This is what we're gonna
It
do."
almost happened.
Yeah.
They were gonna put Avengers Tower in.
Yeah.
They ended up not. Thank
Crazy.
God.
And I think Andrew Garfield is a really good Spider-Man. I don't think we've gotten a bad live-action Spider-Man.
Yeah.
I think that's why, and you know, when the debates about best live-action Spider-Man happens, Andrew Garfield kind of gets left on the back burner. It's Toby or Tom getting argued. But I think the reason those arguments have been able to be like so robust and continue to have that debate is they're all good and there's not a wrong answer. Like it just depends on what you prefer in your Spider-Man and what you like to see shine through.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when the Amazing Spider-Man movies were coming out, like, I didn't like the movies per se as much as I did Tobey's movies, but I really liked Andrew Garfield as Spider-Man, and I really liked Emma Stone as Gwen Stacy. Like,
Their
I liked
chemistry's
the
through the
casting.
roof.
Yeah, But it's just and that debate is so true because I always go Tom, but then I'm like, oh, like I want to pick Toby, and I'm like,
Yeah.
but don't forget Andrew. Like they
Yeah.
were all good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was such Amazing Spider-Man 2 came out at such an interesting time in like superhero cinema because like that was the year Days of Future Past came
Yeah, it
out.
was 14, right?
Winter
2014?
Soldier, Guardians of the Galaxy. So 2014 for me was when the MCU was like really hitting its stride, and other superhero movies were like I don't know, like Man of Steel came out 2013, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, a really interesting era in superhero films
Fun
there,
fact.
and different from what we have now.
All the movies you just listed, I saw at midnight showings.
Yeah.
Like those, the 2013 and 2014 ones, I was there like every single one.
Let's talk about the. I don't think we touched enough on the good of the Raimi trilogy.
Wait,
because,
what about his least favorite?
oh
Well, my least favorite is Amazing Spider-Man.
yeah,
1.
let's talk about that.
I
yeah,
wanted to hear that.
I
Yeah.
think so. I think objectively, 2 is worse.
Mhm.
I think.
Yeah.
But I get a lot of enjoyment from Amazing Spider-Man 2.
Yeah.
Whereas I think 1 is just so boring. The beginning is just a worse version of regular Spider-Man 1. Like you kind of have Uncle Ben be like, "You gotta have responsibility." And, like he doesn't,
It
he
is-
doesn't say it.
It is so fun. It's such a like copying the homework,
Yeah.
but like trying to make it your own.
Yeah, and then like the Lizard's the villain. I love the Lizard in
Yeah.
the comics, but you cut like usually as a family. They're just
Mhm.
trying to, and you cut that, and he's just worse Green Goblin. He's
Yeah.
like the good guy, but he goes to the bad, and his plan is a big thing in the sky. Which
Yeah.
is a big thing from that era, like early 2000s.
Yeah.
Everyone
Yes,
loved
yeah,
their
yeah.
big lasers in the sky. It's just
They're very effective.
One of these times it's gonna work.
yeah. It's just it's boring because everything it does is a worse version of something else,
Mhm.
and like I don't think Andrew Garfield comes into his stride until Amazing Spider-Man 2,
Yeah.
and like the suit looks weird, and he's hunting down. He becomes Spider-Man out of revenge,
Yeah.
not out of justice, which I think is like a very intricate flaw of that
Yeah.
movie because you don't feel like he's as heroic.
Mhm.
I just think it's boring, and I would rather watch Amazing Spider-Man 2 because I get enjoyment from
Yeah.
the movie, but I just feel nothing to Amazing Spider-Man 1.
I definitely feel that. I think too. I really just like the Lizard visually.
Ugh,
Hmm.
yeah.
I think he's like. Ugh.
So
He needs he needs like a maw, like a giant jaw. He's
Yeah.
got like a weird flat.
But favorite scene from that movie is probably the Stan Lee cameo. The fight in throughout the school, and like Stan Lee has the headphones on
Yeah.
and it's all silent. I think that's fun.
yeah, I'll say in defense of the Amazing Spider-Man because it is a lot higher on my list. I think it was perfect, like in what we needed at the time. And that might be a hot take.
Chase, you won't fight him?
That might be a hot take. I shouldn't say perfect because I just tweeted about this and I said it's not a perfect movie.
Yeah.
But
Contradicting himself.
Yeah.
Follow him on Twitter.
But okay, so here's my thing. We all know it's no secret. Sony made that movie so they could keep Spider-Man for a couple more years.
Yeah.
But I think that was a really good story, and they made it feel so different and distinct from the Raimi trilogy, in my opinion. I think Andrew Garfield.
Chase's blood boiling right now.
I wouldn't say it's boiling. It's just what story were they telling?
So I think it was interesting to see Andrew Garfield, Peter Parker's like backstory about his parents. I like seeing kind of how that all factored in. And you said I agree with you. I think it's bad that Spider-Man was kind of born out of revenge in that movie. But I think about the bridge scene. And that's my favorite scene in the movie, where he saves the little boy in the car that's
Good
about to
scene.
fall. Great scene.
Good scenes in the movie. Like
Yeah.
none of these
Yeah.
movies have all bad in them. There's good in all of them.
Yeah.
I just think the unique stuff that Amazing Spider-Man 1 does, like his parents,
Mhm.
I think it comes from the wrong place. If that
Yeah.
makes sense. Like
Okay.
Spider-Man's parents don't matter.
Yeah.
Like it does. That shouldn't. Backstories don't matter, and I think that's what Amazing Spider-Man. Both of them get stuck on is backstory. They have to
Yeah.
explain everything. So that's I just don't like the core conceit of that movie.
Yeah.
And I think it starts with Amazing Spider-Man 1, which is why I put it worse.
I don't know. I like Peter Parker's feeling of abandonment and just wanting to know what happened to his parents, and that's why I really like his relationship with Dr. Connors in that movie too. And also, I will say that I don't think he learns his lesson of responsibility from Uncle Ben in that movie. I think he learns it from Captain Stacy.
Yeah.
Kevin Spacey. Oh God.
Wait,
Oh
yeah.
man.
Yeah, well,
No.
I'm gonna piggyback with Gianni here defending it. While Spider-Man traditionally that's not his backstory. I think that even though Sony made it for the wrong reasons of we want to keep Spider-Man, at least they tried something different.
Yeah.
And I appreciated that because also growing up, I was like, I mean, cool, like Aunt May and Uncle Ben, but like, what happened to his parents?
Yeah.
And while it wasn't the best story, wasn't the best option, at least when I watch it, I'm getting a different experience and different backstory than just completely cloning the Raimi.
Yeah. I can appreciate the good things that movie does do. I just think as a movie, it's just personally my least favorite. It definitely comes from like what you're saying with Spider-Man 3.
Yeah.
Just personally, it's my least favorite.
Right.
Like, I think there's definitely like the bridge scene. I really like, and I like Emma Stone as Gwen Stacy. I
Yeah.
think
She's
great.
delightful.
Yeah.
She's delightful in everything.
Yeah, she's great. I just think at the core of that movie, because it's so like studio made, I just don't like it.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that, and maybe this is like looking at it with more knowledge than you had going in, so again, it's less objective. But like knowing how Sony was operating at that time and working within the framework of this was a movie made inherently like not out of artistic desire, but to keep Spider-Man. The thing about the parent storyline to me is it feels so inorganic because it feels like it was just there for more spin-offs, because that's how Sony was operating at that time. And how much has changed?
Yeah.
But
none has changed.
I mean, they wanted to do like an Aunt May spy movie at one point from those leaked emails. So to me, like having Peter's parents have this like crazy backstory where it just felt like, oh, maybe we can make another movie out of this. And so that's why, and again, that's like, you know, going in knowing about the emails and how they were operating and not judging the film on its own merits, which isn't very fair. I'm just saying for me that kind of hurts it.
You know, thinking about it, when Sony interferes too much, the movies suffer. And they had little to no involvement in Spider-Verse, and it was our first pick on all of our lists.
That's the thing. They just didn't care. They were like, it's an animated movie. Nobody's going to care. And then they accidentally let people make a masterpiece.
Yeah.
Accidentally let Phil Lord and Chris Miller do what they do. You should have let them direct solo
Peter
Star Wars.
Ramsey and great team behind that. Spider-Verse. Let's talk about the good of the Raimi trilogy, because we talked about Spider-Man 3, but Spider-Man 1 and 2, well, Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2 are phenomenal, I think.
Yeah.
One of my favorite parts is the supporting cast. I think everybody around Peter is really strong, because it's not that Toby isn't great, but like until I saw other versions, like in my head, I didn't think of comic MJ or comic Aunt May or comic Harry, like all of them. Like I pictured James Franco, Kirsten Dunst, like all those people. Like they left really lasting performances in my head, even though they weren't amazing. Because 3, there was some weak points in them. But like I just appreciate that you just did the Spider-Man thing like so nonchalantly. But like I really loved the whole story of 1 and 2. Like I was just very, like I loved watching them perform as those characters.
Yeah. I'll jump off of that with Spider-Man 2. I feel like that film is like an epic. You know, I really do. And I think it stands alone. I think you don't even need Spider-Man 1 and 3. If you just had Spider-Man 2, I'm happy that we had Spider-Man 1 and 3, by the way. But, man, just to have Spider-Man 2 as its own thing, I think it's a perfect film.
Yeah.
The Dr. Octavius is
Alfred Molina as Doc Ock.
he's so good. Yeah. The train scene still holds up as like the best Spider-Man fight sequence.
I was going to say the bank scene, too.
Yeah.
The bank scene's great.
I love that. That is such classic Spider-Man.
Yeah. And just I think we really feel for Peter the most in that film more than any of the other ones. And I think that, like you were saying earlier, Flynn, like I think that so many filmmakers in the superhero universe have taken such inspiration from Spider-Man 2. And I think that's why, for me at least, it's always neck and neck with Spider-Verse when I say, like, what's my favorite Spider-Man movie? But yeah, it's perfect.
I also forgot to say J.K. Simmons. He is a beautiful, beautiful
Yes.
man.
Of course.
Yeah.
I am mad at myself for not saying it because he is the best character in the Spider Universe, all of them.
Yeah.
He better be in Spider-Verse too.
I think the whole reason why we don't get a physical Jameson in the Amazing Spider-Man movies, why he only exists as an email, is because they're like, oh my god, what are we gonna cast?
Yeah.
Because J.K. Simmons is so good. And then
just bring him back.
the MCU is like, J.K. Simmons. We're not gonna pick somebody else.
Just bring him back.
Yeah.
He would do it.
Yeah, he's doing it.
I think the Raimi trilogy in general, not even just the first two, like get Peter Parker the most.
Mm.
They love that to beat him up in those
Yeah.
movies.
Yeah.
Everyone hates him for no reason.
Getting smacked face with lunch trays.
Yeah, all
Yeah.
the time. But I think it's great, and I don't think all the acting in those movies are great. I think
Yeah.
Kirsten Dunst and James Franco definitely drag it down a little bit. Not so much, but a little bit. But like,
I feel
if
it.
you look at Aunt May,
Yeah.
there's this scene where in 2 where he tells her that he's the reason Uncle Ben is dead, and she like just quietly goes to him, and I think that scene is
Yeah.
so
That's
powerful.
fantastic.
It's so great, and there's so many little moments in
Yeah.
the Raimi movies that I love, like when Peter and Doc Ock are talking about poetry, or
Mhm.
the Thanksgiving scene in 1 is
Yes.
phenomenal.
Yeah.
I think
The tension.
I think the little moments in those movies, as well as the big, really hold up.
Yeah.
Tobey Maguire, I mean, what a perfect casting at the time, too.
Mhm.
Because it was such a gamble and a bet to even make a Spider-Man movie. And then for Spider-Man 1 to come out and do as well as it did and be as good as it is, I mean, that's just a feat in itself. Willem Dafoe, one of the greatest actors ever.
Yeah.
I mean,
Flynn, you could go off.
Willem
Yeah.
Dafoe. So good.
He's great.
Love him.
and I love that he comes back throughout that trilogy, too. And he doesn't feel like he's just there for no reason. Like, he does offer a lot to Harry Osborn's character. And I think that the Raimi trilogy is just really great.
It is really
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
That's why it still has that cult, like, super passionate fan base of like nothing the MCU does, nothing that, like, can ever touch the Raimi trilogy for them, because they're fantastic movies.
Yeah.
So, you know, it makes sense to have that sort of dedicated, like, love and passion for them.
It speaks a lot to them too, because Marvel fans now will literally pay money to get like Fantastic Four erased from their brain, the original Hulk movie erased from their brain, all the X-Men movies erased from their brain. Just be like, please get them out. But no, these people will fight to the death for Sam Raimi's movies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sam Raimi is a good filmmaker. That is what it is. And he's such an inspired choice for something like that.
I mean, before that, like The Evil Dead was his claim to fame.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like he had done anything like with kids in mind.
Yeah.
And just the knowledge of like what works and the sensibilities that he brings to like Evil Dead and stuff like that would work for a comic book movie.
Well, I think Army
is
of
good
Darkness is
foresight.
like secretly a comic book.
Yeah.
movie
Right,
the way
exactly.
it is. And that probably was what gave them like the confidence in him to do it. Because Army like literally just put a Spider-Man mask over Ash and less cursing.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, he'd certainly be like a much more brash Peter Parker, but I'm about it. And also he appears in which one was it again? All of them. Yeah, all of
He
them.
was
He's
gonna be Mysterio. Yeah.
That's right.
There's an interesting bit of history where Steve Ditko, who designed Spider-Man, was originally a horror comic artist, and then you have Sam Raimi, who's originally a horror director. I think there's an interesting connection between. I don't think it's intentional.
Yeah.
But I think there's
Yeah.
interesting roots that maybe, like, an experience with horror was able to get, because horror is all about emotions.
Right.
Like, you have to relate to the characters to be scared, and so I
Right.
think that's what allowed them to nail Spider-Man, because they knew you had to empathize with this character.
Yeah. I think before we wrap up, something that I really wanted to touch on is that, you know, you look at movies like Spider-Verse, and then you look at movies like The Amazing Spider-Man 2. And I would say that for these 8 films that we have, none of them are objectively terrible movies. None of them are like the worst movie ever made. And I think the reason for that is that the DNA and the character of Spider-Man, you know, written by Stan Lee and designed by Steve Ditko, is just, you know, perfect. Like, and you can make kind of any story you want, and as long as you have the basis of your Peter Parker or your Miles Morales or whoever it might be in the suit, you know, anyone can be Spider-Man.
Yeah.
And I really think that's something that rings true through all of these movies, you know, in the MCU, in the Amazing movies, and in the Raimi trilogy. Like, anyone could put on the mask and Spider-Verse.
Yeah,
So.
that's the understanding in Spider-Verse to me that, like,
Yeah.
just puts it so up there is the fact that it could just means so much to everyone.
Yeah.
And just that understanding of Spider-Man conceptually instead of just like about specific characters is so crazy good in Spider-Verse.
I honestly think it's impossible to make a legitimately bad Spider-Man movie as long as, like you said, they keep Peter Parker or the spirit of the character alive.
Let Sony keep trying.
They are. They are.
No.
Got Morbius coming out.
Well, okay, I said Spider-Man, not his villain spin-off that nobody asked for.
Spider-Man adjacent.
Yes, no, nobody asked for that movie. I don't even think Jared Leto wanted to do it. Just the paycheck. Yeah.
Well, we'll see how that turns out. But
just playing himself.
Well, that wraps up our discussion on our rating and ranking of the Spider-Man movies that we have, and we're looking forward to many, many more.
Yeah, what's your favorite? Let us know.
Yeah, let us know. Thanks for watching and thanks for listening. I'm Gianni,
I'm Flynn.
I'm Luke,
I'm Chase.
and I'm sitting next to Spider-Man.
and we'll see you next time.
I was waiting to say that the whole entire episode.